80s, and some have them well over 100. And that his thesis is that you can't have certain forms of democracy where your average IQ is too low because people don't cooperate enough unless they can make the sort of choices that an average IQ gets you to.
So are those low IQs attributed to drug usage?
Well, no, that's the whole book doesn't actually talk about what causes it, but it does. The book, it's a Stanford published book, but it mentions Jim Flynn a lot, Professor Flynn a lot, and speculates about whether he has views on what can be done to improve IQs. And I just suddenly remembered that I've never seen New Zealand media interviewing him. He's really an international treasure that we hardly know we've got.
He's certainly interviewed in print sometimes, but no, you're right, we've never actually had him on the panel. Any last word on that, or shall I move on?
Well, I wonder, and as many people have before me, about the specificities of IQ tests and what they're actually measuring. And, the things that we measure, which we know we can shift, like the PISA scores in numeracy and literacy, show, quite a detailed and complicated picture about who's learning what and in what ways. And I think they suggest that, to draw a line from there to drugs and alcohol would be probably a little too simple, but we can draw a pretty sharp line in New Zealand between those underperformance on those scores and ethnic group and socioeconomic group and gender on the other hand. So those three would probably be far more important drivers of any difference we see than...
Well, one of them is fetal alcohol syndrome, and I think there's a fair degree of international agreement on that.
I think that's right.
And I don't know whether there's a fetal dope syndrome.
No, you never hear it described as that. But it's an interesting conversation, but as you say, hard to get to the bottom of. The power of the Social Media Newspapers Alliance. A couple of examples. Before we go, Auckland restaurant Miss Moonshine has removed misogynistic slogans from its men's toilet. They were pretty crude, some of them, I shan't repeat them, and it was a family restaurant. So do you approve it wasn't a free speech issue, it was a decency issue? Are you familiar with this case?
I saw the case. I mean, wouldn't go there before or after this.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Stephen, this one's a bit more complex. The Royal Easter Show, lambasted, and boycott calls have been made after photos of injured animals at the show were posted. Anna Skinner saw a pig with scratches all over his body and a tear in its ear, and 2 sheep with deep gashes. And the Royal Easter Show promptly fought back. It says it provides the highest level of care to its animals with a vet on site, plenty of professional A&P members, and Rascal the pig suffered minor scratches because he likes to play rough with the other animals. And I think we saw Rascal the pig, I think it was him yesterday, playing rough in that very manner at the Royal Easter Show.
Being a rascal.
Being a rascal.
I wonder sometimes whether they'll be able to carry on with quite a few of these things where the city people have no familiarity. I mean, if they've ever seen a bunch of pigs in the wild, they're pretty harsh on each other, and the bigger pigs bite the smaller pigs. And just to me, looking at those scratches, I would imagine Rascal probably thought it was pretty trivial.
I guess so. I haven't got time for much about the problems of the world. We should probably mention this Muslim shopkeeper killed on a Glasgow street shortly after posting an Easter message to my beloved Christian nation. Asad Shah wrote on Facebook, "Good Friday, very happy Easter, especially to my beloved Christian nation. Let's follow in the real steps of Jesus Christ and get real success in both our worlds." This is problematic, isn't it? Because here you have someone embracing diversity, speaking out in praise of it, immediately silenced.
This is the problem when you see, people who are sometimes described as moderates, but people who are like us, most of us, suffering these extreme consequences. And
30% of Muslims think that the death penalty is appropriate for apostasy, according to the Pew Research Centre.
That's a parting shot that it's difficult to discuss and the complete lack of time available, but thank you, Steve.
That is indeed a parting shot. I'm not sure where that one came from.
Well,
Steve.
These people just are doing what their religion tells them.
No, he wasn't killed by Muslims, I think.
Stephen Franks, Damon Celici, I have to go, unfortunately. Checkpoint with John Campbell coming up.
Kia Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, 500 jobs to go from New Zealand Post. Who are they? Why are they going? And whilst there's talk of consultation, is it now all a fait accompli? Filthy water in Wairoa, how the buck and the cost appears to be stopping with people who had nothing to do with it. We go to Pakistan, where 70 lives were lost in a playground, and a country must now decide how to respond to that. And Operation Resolve, 20 police staff charged with targeting burglaries in Auckland. Why now? All of that and more over the next 90 minutes. But first, with RNZ News, here's Katrina Batten.
Kia ora, good evening. A further 500 people will lose their jobs at New Zealand Post. The state-owned company says it will cut the jobs by July, which will remove layers of management and help streamline its operation. In 2013, it announced it would cut up to 2,000 jobs, and to date, about 1,300 people have gone. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says the cuts come down to a lack of demand for postal services.
These cuts were signalled back in 2013, so they're not new, they're just part of executing a long-term plan for a business where everyone has worked very hard to make it work, but people just aren't using the post anymore.
The Finance Minister, Bill English. The Senior Cabinet Minister, Paula Bennett, says she doesn't want to see MPs and ministers made less accessible despite receiving death threats. The leaders of Labour and the Green Party say they also receive abusive messages, and there's no place for that sort of abuse. Paula Bennett says she reports threats made against her to the police about once a month, and says she's more concerned about how her family reacts to the threats than for her own safety.
If there's a downside to this job, and it's the only one I honestly come up with, it's how the job affects the people who love you. And that's always pretty distressing. And, you know, when you've got your own kids pointing out things on social media that someone should shoot me at my next public event, it's pretty distressing that your kids are having to read that sort of stuff.
Paula Bennett says that's not the first time she's received death threats. The Mayor of Wairoa says it's cost the District Council thousands of dollars a week to clean up silt from its drinking water after a privately owned dam gate broke. Craig Little says the council will be seeking to recover its costs. Sluice gates at the Waihi Dam were only just fixed last week after being damaged before Christmas. The dam is owned and operated by network company Eastland Group. Mr Little says he doesn't want ratepayers to foot the bill when it's not their fault. Eastland Group says it's not received any substantiated claim. The Environment Minister says he won't be making any promises he can't keep, despite a petition calling on the government to make New Zealand's fresh waterways swimmable. Choose Clean Water campaigners presented the 12,000-strong petition at Parliament this afternoon. The campaigners oppose the government's stance on having a wadable water standard as the bottom line. But Nick Smith says each waterway should be treated on a case-by-case basis.
What I don't think is realistic is to require that every water body in New Zealand be swimmable. That wasn't even true prior to human settlement of New Zealand. And I've just got to be really clear that any law or regulation we put in place is actually doable.
Dr Smith says the Choose Clean Water group is being invited to join up with the Land and Water Forum to help improve freshwater quality. Pakistan's Prime Minister says the terrorists who killed more than 70 people, including Muslim women and children in a Lahore playground, will not divide religions in his country. A Taliban splinter group in Pakistan said it was targeting Christians enjoying the end of the Easter break. Nawaz Sharif says he'll exact revenge for the attack.
My sisters and brothers, I'm here today before you to tell you that we are keeping count of every drop of blood that has been shed by our martyred countrymen. We are continuing to avenge this.
The translated words of Nawaz Sharif, who says the Taliban cannot shatter social harmony in Pakistan. A Hanua resident says the popular local swimming spot where 2 teenagers have died in 9 days is not dangerous. The Auckland Council and Department of Conservation staff were at Hanua Falls this morning after the death of 13-year-old Tony Votumitu there yesterday. Another teenager, 17-year-old Peter Yakopo, drowned there last weekend. The Auckland Council says it's a dangerous swimming hole and people need to take care while in the water. Pascal Antigua-Bridger, who's been swimming there for 21 years, agrees that people should be careful, but doesn't want to see the area closed to the public.
I don't think it should be closed there. I think it should be just like use common sense. I think that's all it comes down to. When the kids are drowning and the parents can see them drowning, obviously they can't do much, because by the time they get to the water, they've already gone down.
Hanua local Pascal Antigua-Bridger. In sport, England's cricketers have moved to claim the favourites tag over New Zealand ahead of Thursday morning's T20 World Cup semi-final in Delhi. The Black Caps have won all 4 games at the tournament but lost to England in a warm-up match as well as a one-day and T20 series in England last year. The Black Caps are to play in Delhi while for England it will be their 3rd straight game at the venue. England all-rounder Ben Stokes says that gives his side the edge.
We know the conditions probably more than New Zealand will, and we know that we've been successful here the last 2 games, but we're not going to be going to this game thinking we've won it already, because we know New Zealand are the form team and they're hard to beat, especially in this form at the moment.
Ben Stokes. The White Ferns play the West Indies in their semi-final in Mumbai on Thursday night. The former New Zealand Rugby League international Junior Sa'u has been involved in a brawl with English fans after his Salford Super League side beat Huddersfield. Sa'u and another former NRL player, Jason Carney, were concerned for the welfare of their families who were sitting close to where it began. They went into the stands to check on them, leading to further confrontation. The women's world tennis #1, American Serena Williams' bid for a 9th Miami Open title has come to an abrupt end, with her beaten in 3 sets in the 4th round by 15th-seeded Russian Svetlana Kuznetsova. The men's 2nd seed, Andy Murray, also suffered a shock loss when he was beaten by Bulgarian Grigor Dimitrov. That's the news.
Money's tight in Dunedin, and that's putting heavy pressure on the city's institutions.
Our own dedicated regional reporters.
In Dunedin, every development spurs a major debate. Everyone wants to have their say.
Who will take you closer to the story?
But the Otago region's much more than Dunedin.
Focused, accurate, passionate.
I'm Ian Telfer, and I'm Radio New Zealand's Otago reporter.
On air, online, and now on iHeartRadio. RNZ News.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine. Auckland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Western Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa, fine. Eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, fine spells with isolated showers today, mainly about the ranges. Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy drizzle from evening. Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges tomorrow. Buller and Northern Westland, a few showers, clearing overnight, then fine. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy morning drizzle. Otago and Southland, rain at times today with possible squally thunderstorms, scattered showers elsewhere, fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, showers overnight, otherwise mainly fine. It's 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed. Katrina, see you at 5:35. 500 New Zealand post workers are expected to lose their jobs by the end of June. The state-owned company announced in late 2013 it would cut up to 2,000 jobs. And to date, about 1,300 people have gone. It says the latest cuts will remove layers of management and help streamline operations. We asked NZ Post for an interview today. The SOE declined. Joe Gallagher from E2, the recently created merger of the EPMU and other unions, represents postal workers. He says the reductions are the result of the company's determination to cut costs in its postal business and the replacement of old-fashioned postie roles, including sorting the mail before taking it out 5 days a week for delivery, with reduced delivery frequency and sequence sorting.
Sequence sorting is where the mail is effectively no longer do posties sort the mail. They have these machines that sort it right down to the address, and then it's put in trays and taken out to the delivery branch. And you'll note Post has been talking for some time about what they call the integrated delivery agent, and these are these new electric, so I suppose they're a cross between a quad bike and a little van, but they'll pick up the slack in what is a very tough domestic courier market, and they'll be a combination of a postie and a courier, delivering through the streets, and the sequence sorting will flow into that, and they will be the last two pieces in this puzzle, because Post is effectively sold a lot of their fixed-term assets, and now really the only other places they can get significant gains is to cut that labour cost.
Okay, and they're mostly going to cut that labour cost in the post business because Kiwibank is contributed $127 million of their underlying profit of $128 million. So Kiwibank's paying the bills. New Zealand Post is now a cost against the organisation, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is a challenge with a declining volume of 10% in the mail market. It provides a challenge, but I would put a note of caution in there because they are repositioning themselves as a logistics and a parcel business, and obviously the bank is a jewel in the crown, which ironically is largely, the growth of that bank is largely being funded by what I term the red part of the business, which is the processing part of the business. But this year, for the first time ever, parcel revenue outstripped mail revenue in terms of the results.
How is the NZ Post management handling this restructuring? Is there consultation? Is there decency? Do you feel like the union has been listened to?
Oh, look, I mean, obviously, it's been leaked out slowly. It's sort of come out pretty hard today. I mean, we work constructively with New Zealand Post, but this change process will affect a lot of people in the management and the specialist type roles, and it's quite an aggressive timetable if you look at it. In that sense, they expect most of these jobs to be gone by the end of June. So consultation is pretty kind of hollow. It'll really be, in my view, discussing timelines and at which point you exit the business, with dignity and humility and all of those, HR terms. But really, there'll be a consultation, but you won't be really changing what the main outcome, and that is to drop 500 jobs and, try and hit a revenue target of about 50 million in savings.
Joe, can I clarify that? So you were learning at the end of March about this in formal, explicit terms. In fact, it's April at the end of this week, and the jobs will be gone by the end of June.
Absolutely. Yep. I can say that I've heard informally through my sources as these things break out, but in their view is not a lot of them are what I call covered by the collective agreement, but we still have lots of members in these roles, because some people have been around Post for 20 and 30 years.
Right, been promoted, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. But so they retain their membership. But in terms of formal notification, it's really just been drip fed out.
So, Joe, when people talk about consultation, when people talk about a consultation process, is that a meaningful term in such circumstances?
Oh, look, I don't want to make light of it, but it's a bit like a hippie commune in terms of that. Really they say they consult and we can't say anything, but really they're consulting over the timeline, because effectively they've made a decision to get rid of the bulk of these jobs to further gain some what they call efficiency gains and save some money. So it's not really they consult, but consultation you would think would mean that it would change the outcome. This is not going to change the outcome in my view. As hard as it is to say, I will tell the truth. People like to kind of mask it up and say no decisions have been made, and it's kind of, we are consulting over this. But I would say with job cuts of this magnitude, some serious decisions have been made. And while it is very unpalatable, people need to front up and just admit that that is really what's going to happen.
Joe Gallagher from the union Air 2. Once again, New Zealand Post declined to be interviewed. You would have heard Joe Gallagher calling on them to front up. We are on air until 6:30. If somebody from New Zealand Post, NZ Post, would like to join us, we'd be delighted to have them on the program. It's 14 minutes past 5. The Senior Cabinet Minister, Paula Bennett, says she does not want to see MPs and ministers made less accessible despite receiving death threats. Mrs Bennett says she reports threats made against her to the police about once a month, and says she's more concerned about how her family reacts to the threats than for her own safety. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Paula Bennett says she was at an event at the end of last week where TPP protesters threw sex toys at her car. She says it was unpleasant and unsavoury, but she's experienced worse.
If there's a downside to this job, and it's the only one I honestly come up with, it's how the job affects the people who love you. And that's always pretty distressing. And, when you've got your own kids pointing out things on social media that someone should shoot me at my next public event, it's pretty distressing that your kids are having to read that sort of stuff.
Paula Bennett says she hopes safety fears won't result in ministers being made less accessible.
I don't think it's any more people. I just think the ones that are there are getting up to a level of anger where you've got your 8th year of a government and they're choosing to display that in ways that they are. But I just don't want to change being a New Zealand minister that's approachable and out there and talking to people.
Paula Bennett says it's not the first time she's received death threats. The Labour Party leader Andrew Little says there's no place for those kinds of threats against any MP.
It's right when people are concerned about what ministers and the government is doing in their name, that they protest if that's what they want to do, but there is no place in our political debate and discourse for threats of violence or physical harm.
Mr Little says unfortunately threats are easier to make by social media, but he says while nothing justifies those sorts of threats, people are also feeling the pinch more than they have in the past.
There are a lot of people who are doing it tough, still doing it tough, some doing it tougher, for whom there is a greater sense of anger that they are expressing when they talk, certainly to the likes of me, no doubt my colleagues, and the way they communicate.
The Green Party co-leader Metiria Ture also gets abuse, but says she doesn't think it's getting worse. She says there is enough security in place to keep MPs safe.
There are systems in place to help protect us from violent behaviour. In the main, they work. There are always concerns about our staff, of course, because they often get more harassment, and our families are subject to harassment too on occasion as well. But we put ourselves in this public position where we have control over people's lives. We need to accept the full responsibility for that. And sometimes, people will be very angry with us.
Metiria Ture says one of the great things about New Zealand's democracy is how accessible its politicians are, and it would be a shame if that was to change. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
Broken sluice gates, which have caused more than a metre of silt to flow from the Waihi Dam into 3 Hawke's Bay rivers, has cost ratepayers tens of thousands of dollars and rising. The gates owned by Eastland Group were damaged in a storm last September. The Wairoa Mayor, Craig Little, says ratepayers and holidaymakers have had their summer holidays ruined by being unable to swim or fish because of the silt. But that's just a small part of it. He says the council has had to spend thousands of dollars a week on removing silt from the town's drinking water, and many of the region's farmers also rely on that river for their water. I asked Craig Little what exactly has been going on.
Look, we've had a dam that's been spilling silt into our river. They said they couldn't shut the gates, but it certainly helped them financially to get rid of the silt down the river the way they've been doing it. And it's just really, dare I say it, has brushed everybody off in the community, whether that's, people who use the river for fishing, recreation, and even we get our water out of the river for our people in town, and it's just costing us thousands to do what we normally do.
So what are you having to do? Are you having to remove the silt from the water?
Well, generally when silt comes down a river, it comes down in a storm event. She's gone out to sea and you're no worries at all. But this silt's been coming down in low river flows and it's just stopping all the way down, settling all the way down the river. And basically we're sucking in silt, so we've got to get it out of the water system. Our water has to be as clear as anybody else's in the country to drink.
OK, what's it cost you so far, roughly?
Oh, look, I'd say thousands every week, easily. But it's for me, that's one of the things, but it's the cost of our people. They haven't had the use, they've basically lost the summer use of this river from right up the dam all the way down to Wairoa. Wairoa, Wairoa's renowned for our river. We're named after the river, and it's just been a shocker.
And this isn't a wealthy community, right? So this is ratepayer money that is being spent removing the silt that the ratepayers didn't put there from their water supply.
That's correct. So we've got a company that owns the Waihi Dam. So it's up to them to ensure that accidents like this happen. And again, we've got the regional council. It's up to them to make sure that they regulate it so things like this don't happen. And basically, as a corporate citizen, we're not seeing them as doing the right thing to Wairoa.
Can we talk about the company that are doing this? Have you been trying to speak to them? What has been their response?
Okay, look, from the start I rang them straight away when I heard that we had an issue with the river, and they didn't get back to me. So then I rang the regional council, and it's just every week we've been promised something that's going to be the end of it. And now we're 3 or 4 months out. 4 months out from when it first happened, and finally they say they've got it all fixed. But whilst they've got it fixed, that doesn't mean that they forget about us now. You know, I don't want to see a big costly court case. They get fined, we get nothing. You know, and this is probably what's going to happen.
So the Eastland Group, have you managed to speak to anyone from this company?
Yes, they finally came and saw us at the council. It was a council-only session, and they got pretty well grilled by all of us. And we did go to public as well. But yeah, they're pretty remorseful, and so they should be. You know, their credibility has been completely, well, it's just not there at the moment, and they need to rebuild that. And when I say rebuild that, we need to be confident here in Wairau that this is never going to happen again.
Did they offer to come up with any costs, any compensation to help offset the costs that you've had to bear of cleaning this water up?
Not at all, but I'll make it quite clear. We were never notified at all, even though both the Regional Council and the Eastland Group know we get our water out of the river. No one even thought about giving us a ring to tell us the problems upstream. You know, and that's just thrown us. So no one's offered to pay any costs at this stage, but we will be recovering them, believe me.
Okay, and in the meantime, no swimming, no fishing still?
No, pretty well, no fishing. Look, it's going to clear now, but the problem is to get out to your swimming holes that you've got to wade through filthy, stinky mud. Just give an example, our intake for our water for the town sits normally just under 2 metres above the water, above the riverbed. It's only sitting about 300, which is about a foot. So that's how much the river has filled up with silt. It's just filthy. I just hope that it's not going to continue, you know, our fish life or kaumoana is going to be affected. I don't know. We don't know what the long-term effects of this is going to be.
Wairoa Mayor Craig Little. So what do Eastland Group, which owns the gates, say in response to all of this? Well, they refuse to be interviewed by Checkpoint. In a statement, its Chief Executive Matt Todd says it's spoken to the Wairoa District Council and some residents, but has received no substantiated complaints. He says Eastland Group has worked diligently and urgently to fix the gates with people on site for long hours, 7 days a week. Mr Todd also apologised to people who could no longer use the river. Mr Todd, we are on air for another 68 minutes if you would like to join us on the radio and say that in person. Staying with the subject of water with the time at 22 minutes past 5, some people walked more than 300 kilometres to present a petition to Parliament today which calls on the government to make New Zealand's fresh waterways swimmable. The campaign has collected 12,000 signatures in opposition to the government's stance on having a wadeable water standard. As the bottom line, Maya Burry reports.
What do we want? Clean water! When do we want it? Now! What do we need? Clean water! When do we need it? Now!
10,000 blue paper water drops were shaped to form a river at the steps of Parliament, representing the more than 12,000 signatures the Choose Clean Water petition received. Of the more than 100 campaigners there today, about 30 people, including children as young as 7, had walked from Turangi near Taupua to Parliament over the Easter holiday. The campaign coordinator, Marnie Prickett, says their efforts are evidence they're committed to leaving clean, safe, fresh water for the next generation.
We've just heard from our young people that they are fearful for their future and they want us to look after them. They want us to make the right decision for them. And there's just nothing more essential than clean water.
Last month, the government announced 23 initiatives for improving the management of fresh water. But the Green Party MP Catherine Delahunty, who accepted the petition, says not enough is being done to stop the runoff from dairy farms, which she says is a major part of the problem.
Chuck in a bit of industrial pollution, toss in a bit of untreated sewage, throw in a bit of climate change temperature, and what have you got? The veins, the heart of our whenua struggling to survive.
Ms Delahunty says figures showing nearly 2/3 of New Zealand rivers fail the health standard for swimming are unacceptable. Labour leader Andrew Little agrees.
It doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to accept this. And I think we are all touched here at the commitment and the energy that you have brought to this kaupapa, to this house, your house, to give us this message that you are not prepared to accept that anymore.
The Environment Minister, Nick Smith, says he's welcoming the conversation sparked by the petition, but won't be making any promises he can't keep.
What I don't think is realistic is to require that every water body in New Zealand be swimmable. That wasn't even true prior to human settlement of New Zealand, and I've just got to be really clear that any law or regulation we put in place is actually doable.
Dr Smith says the Choose Clean Water Group is being invited to join with the Land and Water Forum to help improve New Zealand's fresh water quality. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
24 and a half minutes past 5. Coming up next on Checkpoint, 2 young men drown in less than 10 days at Hunua Falls. Is it time for the popular swimming spot to close? And later in the program, why Bunnings management has removed a defibrillator paid for by staff from its Dunedin store. All of that and more coming up. We're in Pakistan too shortly. We'd love to hear from you. You can contact us in a variety of ways. You can text us 2101. You can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Our Checkpoint Twitter and Facebook address is Checkpoint RNZ, and we do really love getting your feedback. The second death in less than a fortnight at a popular swimming spot near Auckland is sparking questions as to whether it should be open at all. 13-year-old Lilatone Vetemotu drowned at the Hunua Falls yesterday. It comes just 9 days after another teenager died at the same spot. Auckland Council says people shouldn't be swimming there, but some locals disagree. Muriel Baker reports from the falls.
Hunua Falls is a beautiful scenic spot, and while its pool looks calm and still on the surface, the Auckland Council says its pool can reach depths of up to 19 metres. There are warning signs at every entrance to this area and life-saving buoys posted around the pool's edges, although it's not known if any of them were used in this latest tragedy. Auckland Council and Department of Conservation staff were at Hunua Falls today, checking the area and reviewing the warning signs. Auckland Council's Parks Manager Mark Bowater says people shouldn't be swimming here, but there's little the council can do to stop them.
We consider it an unsafe spot to swim. So there are natural beauties there are natural hazards as well. And we're doing everything we can to warn people about those hazards. We can't stop people from going into the water. It really is not physically possible to close off the falls.
Pascal Artinga-Bridger, a Hunua local, has been swimming at the waterfall for 21 years. He says he was here when another boy drowned at the falls and one of his nephews injured himself jumping into the water. Despite this, he doesn't want to see the place closed to the public.
I don't think it should be closed there. I think it should be just like use common sense. I think that's all it comes down to. Like even if the children are getting supervised by their parents, but the parents actually have to be in the water with them, because it's too late when the kids are drowning and the parents can see them drowning. Obviously they can't do much, because by the time they get to the water they've already gone down.
The principal of Tuako College, where Lilatone Vetemotu, known as Tony, went to school, Chris Beattie, says the school is doing everything it can to support his family and friends.
We're supporting them in terms of looking after them. A lot of people have gone around to visit, so there's going to be many of the staff have been there to visit, and there'll be many of the kids over the next few days, so we'll allow that to happen and facilitate kids if they wish to go and see Tony. We've got counsellors in place at school, crossing our T's and dotting our I's. We're prepared for supporting the staff as well as as students at school and the family.
A rāhui has been laid over the area and will be lifted after a blessing there by local iwi tomorrow. The police have referred the teenager's death to the coroner. For Checkpoint, Muriel Baker.
We go to Pakistan now, where security forces have been raiding homes believed to be connected with Jamaat-ul-Ahrar, the Taliban splinter group that's claimed responsibility for the suicide bombing that killed 70 people, roughly half of them children, in a playground in Lahore. Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has met with security officials in an attempt to better coordinate the country's response to an ongoing campaign of terror, frequently but certainly not always against the country's Christian population. Indeed, whilst Christians were the claimed target of the Easter attack, such is the universal appeal of a playground and the daily coexistences of cities like Lahore that it's now believed more Muslims than Christians were killed in the bombing. Still, as all this occurs, Pakistan's more hardline Islamist politicians are protesting over what they see as Mr. Sharif's pro-Western stance. In such an environment, the Prime Minister's balancing act is immensely difficult, but the toll of failing to prevent such attacks is a terrible one indeed. As the search continues for clues and body parts, the park with its colourful rides was ever a merry-go-round so forlorn, tells a story of striking hatred.
I was standing there near the seesaw when this blast happened. The explosion was very loud. As we rushed here, we saw a pool of blood and people lying here and there. There is no proper security arrangements here. There should be good security arrangements in place here.
That a fun park should require security at all tells its own story. So too the scenes at Lahore's hospitals. chaos out the front as casualties arrived in terrible numbers. Relatives receiving the heartbreaking news. Here, a mother and grandmother.
My 20-year-old son, father of my grandchildren. My son has a 2-year-old daughter. Oh my God, you should not have left me, my son.
Young parents, young children, a bombing designed to cause both damage and offence. And, as widely reported, here by Reuters, there was another target too.
The attack at Lahore's Gulshan-e-Iqbal Park left pools of blood on the streets and a community shaken. The Taliban faction Jamaat al-Ahrar claimed responsibility, saying Christians were its target.
As Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif visited the wounded, he also faced a profoundly difficult balancing act. The leader of the Pakistan Muslim League, the country's majority political party, vowed to crack down on the extremists, but he must do so without alienating his own core constituency. Meanwhile, in the West...
This week, our hearts are with the people of Belgium, as terrorist attacks claimed the lives of more than 30 people.
That's half the number who died in Lahore is not lost on anyone. But where Belgium welcomes American support, Pakistan-US relations are fraught at best. As the funerals take place for those murdered, and not only Christians died in the fun park in Lahore, Pakistan must somehow fight the battle against violent extremism itself. Last January, the same group of Taliban terrorists targeted a Shiite mosque in Rawalpindi. These are people who make enemies easily. Over Easter, they found them in a playground. The extremists within, the victims within. So much for Pakistan to lose. So much already lost. Coming up on Checkpoint, we go back to Pakistan and talk to The Guardian's brilliant correspondent, Bina Shan, who is going to join us live from there. Also, a $2.2 billion price tag to replace the country's underground asbestos water pipes. The FBI drops its case against Apple, and Auckland Police assign another 20 staff to solving the city's burglaries. Plus, Nona is sitting beside me to discuss business. But before all of that, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The government says it's not planning to sell New Zealand Post despite its continuing struggle with fewer postal deliveries. The state-owned company will cut a further 500 jobs by July after shedding 1,300 jobs since 2013. The Finance Minister, Bill English, says the company is adjusting to becoming a logistics business rather than just handling letters. The Cabinet Minister, Paula Bennett, says she doesn't want MPs becoming less accessible despite them receiving death threats. Ms Bennett says she reports threats made to her against her to the police about once a month. She says she's more concerned with how her family reacts to the threats than for her own safety. Broken sluice gates that let more than a metre of silt flow from the Waihi Dam into 3 Hawke's Bay rivers have cost ratepayers tens of thousands of dollars. Wairoa's Mayor Craig Little says the council has had to spend thousands of dollars a week on removing the silt from the town's drinking water. He says he doesn't want ratepayers to foot the bill when it's not their fault, and the council will be seeking to recover its costs. Housing New Zealand is hoping to recoup $54,000 from 2 tenants who contaminated their state houses with methamphetamine. The Tenancy Tribunal has ordered an Ashburton woman to pay $34,000 and a former Whangarei tenant to pay more than $17,000 in clean-up costs. Pakistan's Prime Minister says he will avenge the suicide bombing on Easter Day in which 72 people died. It was claimed by a splinter group of the Pakistan Taliban. And the United States Justice Department is dropping its legal action against Apple, saying it's used a third party to crack the encryption on a smartphone. The phone was used by one of the Islamist gunmen who was shot dead 14 people in San Bernardino last December. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thanks very much, Katrina. We have more on that Apple story coming up too in the not too distant future. But let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who has joined us in the studio. Nona, welcome. New Zealand commercial properties in hot demand, reflecting, you say, the strongest ever increase in the number of properties sold.
Go figure, huh?
Yeah,
the Auckland property market, of course, was leading the way, but not just Auckland. There was interest in Wellington, which has come off a lower base, albeit. Less interest in Christchurch, but lots of interest in Queenstown, Taranaki. Sorry, actually not Taranaki, Tauranga and Hamilton.
So what have we got here? We've got 136 commercial properties changed hands in the second half of 2015, compared with 119 the year earlier.
That's right.
Total value?
Well, the total value was actually less important. That wasn't a record, but it was still quite high. $2.83 billion. That's a lot of money. And now a lot of this money is coming from overseas. It's chasing the larger properties, but that's partly because the smaller properties just aren't available. So what's happening is, the smaller holdings of properties, commercial properties that we might see in, the smaller hotels, that kind of thing. No one wants to sell them because they're finally getting a really good yield and they're not selling. So what's happening? People are coming and knocking on doors saying, can we please buy your property? And so sellers are saying reluctantly, okay, sure, maybe, but they're attracting quite good property prices, not over the top, mind you. I mean, the property prices are still somewhat held because the market there's a number of properties, but if you want to sell, there's a line of buyers out there.
Wow, and mostly foreign buyers.
It's not just foreign buyers, it's also local buyers. And one of the big problems is that the people who have the smaller properties, they might want to sell, but then what are they going to buy? There's nothing on the market.
So they're staying in business and they're keeping their properties.
Right.
So does this mean, obviously, they're larger properties that are selling, but is it also at the more expensive end of the market?
Yeah, it's at really the top end. We're seeing very expensive properties trading hands. We've seen some in Wellington and, of course, in Auckland. Auckland accounts for most of the sales, about 75% of the properties that have sold are in Auckland. So that's quite a lot. And again, there are properties in other regions as well, but the interest is, of course, in Auckland. And what was interesting, I was speaking with this fellow and he said Auckland is seen as a gateway. So overseas investors want to buy properties in cities which are like gateways to the country. So I guess if you looked around the world and you thought about it, Vancouver would be a good example. Sydney would be another example. So that's the kind of city that Auckland is seen as.
Okay, thanks, Nona. Record demand. Wow. Let's look at the markets. What did they do today?
Well, it's funny because overseas we've seen some really lackluster reaction to some mixed data in the United States, but the New Zealand market had another record close.
Wow.
I know. Up 14 points, not a lot, but still.
And did you notice what sort of volume it was on after Easter?
It's pretty weak volume, I'd have to say.
Yeah.
But nothing like last week. Last week, leading into the Easter holidays, I think people had left the city and they'd gone a lot earlier. Yeah. So we closed at 6,676. The New Zealand dollar is trading at 67.5 cents, and of course that reflects that weaker US data, and 89.3 Australian.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here in Auckland. Thank you so much, Nona. Let's stay in Auckland. 20 extra police officers in the city are being assigned purely to solving burglaries. At the moment, nearly 95% of the burglaries are unresolved. Detective Senior Sergeant Ian Chapman is heading Operation Resolve, and he joins us now. Welcome to the program, DSS Chapman.
John.
Hello, nice to talk to you. I want to say to you why you're doing this, but I think you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? But there's been a lot of publicity lately around what you yourself admit is a resolution rate of 6.2%. That barely qualifies as a resolution rate, doesn't it?
I know, it doesn't make for good reading. Look, I mean, we know firsthand, a lot of our officers know firsthand what the invasion of privacy, the crime of burglary comes with. It's such a personal offence. We've seen in the last wee while in the Auckland City District a spike. We had a very successful operation run late last year called Operation Pine Tree that was targeting volume crime, the burglars and the unlawful takers. That operation's wrapped up, and unfortunately we're just seeing it start to rise again. So what we're doing with this Operation Resolve that we've launched, we've got 20 strong, and we're targeting specifically the burglars, We're in a fairly unique position where we know who these people are. Very rarely will a burglar come to our attention, on a one-off basis. They've got history with us. So we're looking at those 20%, 20% of offenders commit 80% of the crime. So we're looking at specifically those 20%.
Why are you doing this now? Is it because there has been lots of publicity around a resolution rate of 6.2%? And in fact, burglars think, wow, there's bugger all chance of being caught. I'm in. Is that why there's been the spike in burglaries, do you think?
Well, we've got dedicated teams up and down the country, our tactical crime units, whose core focus is the volume crime, is the burglaries and the car crime. But it's like a sine wave, we see these spikes And so we've responded to that. We see the spike in the city district, so we've dedicated this team to look for those people who are hurting us the most.
The question is, of course, if you know who's doing it, and if these are recidivists, and if there is a number of offenders who absolutely commit a disproportionately large number of crimes, why haven't you been busting them beforehand?
Well, I mean, quite simply, we have. These are people who have come to our attention before, but, the numbers, the people out there who are committing these crimes, the numbers are, quite startling, the amount of people who there are. So we've decided, we're focusing on those, the people we're going to be dealing with are the ones who are on active charges for burglary, who are still committing offences whilst out on bail. We've made the pledge that, if the circumstances exist, we're going to be opposing bail for every burglar that we lock up. We're going to look at, a really strong and robust prosecution case against these people.
For every burglar? So you're not presumably talking about the opportunist who sees a window open. You're talking about the professional recidivists who are making a pretty decent living out of this, are you?
Operation Resolve is looking at focusing on those guys who are out hurting us, those ones who make a living out of ripping off you and I.
Okay. I wonder why now. Now, I know there's been publicity, and I know that there's always a balancing act in policing, isn't there? You always have to make decisions about what you police hardest, because policing is, like everything, a scarce resource. But has there been some political pressure on you? Has someone said, hey, this is really embarrassing us, sort this out?
Well, I've been put in charge of this operation. I've got 20 staff underneath me. All I know is that these people are the ones who have been picked to go on this operation are really keen, really dedicated. They're the thief catchers. They're the ones who you and I as community members want out there chasing.
Absolutely, and I'm sure this is a cracker team, and I'm sure you're going to do a brilliant job. But didn't Auckland want this a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I keep coming back to the point, why now?
Well, we have operations like this, several times throughout the year. This is the only one which we focus specifically on burglars. So we're hoping to make a real dent in the amount of cases that are coming across our desks.
Okay.
The tactical crime units, they work tirelessly for this sort of thing. But as I say, it goes in ebbs and waves. So we're seeing a spike at the moment. And so as a result, we've launched this operation.
And if you have rascals who are known recidivists, how do you police them? Is there a preemptive way you can do it? Or do you simply think this looks like person X and go immediately to their house? Or is there going to be a form of surveillance? Are you going to electronically target people? Are you going to be watching them more closely in advance of the crimes? What will you be doing?
You're giving away all my secrets here, John. Look, we are going to be using a number of resources, a number of different specialist skills to go after these guys. But, at the end of the day, hopefully your public are going to be satisfied with the fact that first thing in the morning, my team are going to be out there. We're going to be executing search warrants. We're going to be executing arrest warrants. We're going to be kicking indoors, and we're going to be looking for these people who have been, as most active in the city as these guys are making a fairly decent profit off breaking into the community's houses.
DSS Ian Chapman, who is in charge of Operation Resolve, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. We'd love your feedback on that and other things in Checkpoint tonight. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's coming up to 17 minutes to 6. A $2.2 billion price tag has been put on replacing the country's asbestos water supply pipes. Water New Zealand estimates 9,000 kilometres of asbestos cement pipes will need to be replaced in the next 2 to 3 decades. Here's Teresa Cowie with this report.
The life expectancy of asbestos cement pipes is about 50 years, meaning many are now due for replacement. The pipes were installed for local water supply networks from the 1950s to the 1970s, and manufacturers stopped producing them in the mid-1980s. The industry group, Water New Zealand, estimates the total length of the country's water supply pipelines is 36,500 kilometres and is valued at $8.7 billion. Its chief executive, John Campbell, says many of the pipes are nearing the end of their useful life, and councils will have to do careful planning to make the replacement affordable to ratepayers, because other parts of the water supply also need upgrading.
As these pipes come up for renewal, and that will depend entirely on the ground conditions in which they're in and the acidity of the water that's running through them and so on. The local councils will have to make provision in their district plans for replacing, in their work plans for replacing those pipes. So communities will be exposed to that cost over the next 2 or 3 decades, I would think.
John Fallett says there are a number of options available that are cheaper than digging them out, such as relining existing pipes or leaving decommissioned pipes in the ground and placing new pipes around them. Using asbestos in water pipes is considered safe by the World Health Organization, which says swallowing asbestos that's present in water doesn't present the same cancer risk as inhaling dry particles. But if the pipes are cut or broken when dry, they can pose a health risk if particles are released into the air. In a statement, the spokesperson for Wellington Water, Alex Van Parson, said asbestos cement pipes are not prioritised for replacement just because they're made of asbestos.
Replacement is generally done on an as-needs basis, though we replace pipes that are bursting before ones that aren't. Replacing asbestos cement pipes, as opposed to other materials like cast iron or galvanised iron, does require safety precautions, for example when cutting, handling and disposing of the material. The precautions taken for this do not add a significant amount to the overall cost of a pipe replacement.
Local Government New Zealand's Vice President Brendan Duffy says ratepayers are not in for a shock.
I'm confident that councils across New Zealand have a very good understanding of the significance and the magnitude of the work that we have in front of us over the next generations. This never stops. There'll always be infrastructural upgrade.
Brendan Duffy says councils have got the replacement and renewal of asbestos cement pipelines well under control. For Checkpoint, Teresa Cowie.
Bunnings Warehouse, the Australian-owned household hardware chain with 50 outlets in New Zealand, is again under fire from its own staff members, this time for reportedly removing defibrillators from 3 of its stores. In the past few weeks, we've reported on small-scale industrial action that saw staff members served with suspension notices after removing their Bunnings aprons. Now it's not aprons but defibrillators that have been removed, the latter taken out by management. And in Dunedin, as Shirley Waltu from the First Union told us, the staff paid for the defibrillator themselves.
It was the social club that put the money together, so it was actually the social club that decided that they would buy this defibrillator for as a memoriam, basically, for a staff member that passed away.
And the staff member died of a heart attack, is that right?
Apparently, yes. He went home and he didn't die in the store. He went home and unfortunately had a heart attack. Quite a young man, apparently, too. So. Okay, so the staff thought, right, we will honour him by protecting ourselves against such an event in the workplace. They chipped in, raised the money to buy the defibrillator, and now it's been removed? It's been taken out of the store. They've been told they're not allowed it in the store, that they can donate it to a community group, but it's not the Bunnings way. And what is the context for it not being the Bunnings way? Why isn't it the Bunnings way? And Shirley, we have tried to ask Bunnings themselves this. Well, what they came back to the staff for was that they needed trained staff and it needed to be maintained and you know, it was just going to be too costly. But it's been in the store for over 3 years now, and we've got, there's a trained St John's member that works in the store, so he's actually been doing the checking, and he's there on his shift. It's the machine itself talks you through it, so you don't actually technically need any training. So Shirley, can I just clarify this? Has the presence of this machine in the Bunnings store in Dunedin cost Bunnings any money so far? Not that we're aware of. It's cost them nothing because it's been checked by a staff member. There's first aiders that are trained in the store anyway, as a matter of course, and it's cost them nothing for the machine itself. Okay, and have the same machines or similar machines, defibrillators, been taken out of other Bunnings stores too? Well, I understand that they've been taken out of the Nelson store and the Gisborne store, and they're the only other two that we're aware of at this stage. We're a bit concerned that when you look at where they're taken out, provincial towns, which have lesser services than others, and you can say Dunedin doesn't fit there, but the health in Dunedin resonates quite strongly with Dunedin people and the Southland people, because we've had to fight, people here have had to fight for everything they've got. So having a defibrillator in the store
means that there's a measure of security there for people when they're going out shopping. If something happens, people are able to help assist them out.
Have you discussed this with Bunnings? Have you managed to have a meeting with Bunnings management and ask them why they are doing this?
They won't discuss it. I tried talking to the area manager along with the delegate one day, and it wasn't for discussion. They just shut it down completely.
What, just flatly refuse to discuss it at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, don't want to discuss it.
And so what do you think about this, Shirley, and what do your members think? What do staff members think?
Well, staff members, I got a bit of a feel from them. They think it's ludicrous. They definitely, it was a memorial and it shouldn't have been taken away. It was there for the team and the customers, so for the staff and team. And it definitely goes against the community-minded statements that staff it's said to staff, we're here or we're about community, and yet it goes against their community-minded statements. So it's just, they're flabbergasted and they're disappointed. They're quite upset with what's happened. And I mean, even the locals are upset. I've just been informed today that some of the tradies have pulled their accounts until the defibrillators returned. There's other customers that have taken their business elsewhere because they don't agree with what Bunnings have done. They've received emails. Bunnings are receiving emails every day saying that that the public are concerned and upset with what's happening with it. So, you know, it just beggars belief that Bunnings are just ignoring what the public are saying as well.
Shirley Waltzu is the First Union organiser who represents the Bunnings staff in Dunedin. We called Bunnings and they declined to appear, as they have every single time we've called them from Checkpoint over the various stories during the past few weeks. We won't give up though, and Bunnings, you're welcome to appear on the program anytime you like. The FBI has dropped its legal case against Apple. It says it now has successfully unlocked an encrypted iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino gunmen. Here's Ashraf Fahim from Reuters.
The high-stakes legal battle between Apple and the U.S. government comes to an abrupt and unexpected end. On Monday, the U.S. Justice Department said it had successfully unlocked the encrypted iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino shooters and dropped its legal case against Apple. Apple had refused a court order that would have forced it to write new software to get into the phone.
That we have a responsibility to help you protect your data and protect your privacy.
The phone in question was owned by Rizwan Farouk, one of the husband and wife shooters in the December rampage in which 14 people were killed. But the fight between Apple and the government leaves questions over law enforcement's access to encrypted information unresolved. The tech industry insists that anything that helps authorities bypass security safeguards undermines security for everyone. The government says they have to access phone data to carry out successful criminal investigations. Apple may have won this round of the encryption battle, but the war is far from over.
Well, let's go to Ashraf's colleague, Joseph Mean, who is the technology projects reporter for Reuters and joins us now from San Francisco via Skype video. Joseph, welcome to the program. It's lovely to have you with us. Is this a win for who? A convenient out for everyone? How is this playing out, do you think?
Well, it's a bit messy, really. So it's a win for Apple in the specific, but it's not a resounding victory.
No.
The good news from Apple's perspective is that they were not forced by the court to do the government's bidding and hack into their own customers' devices. That would set a really dramatic precedent. That's why everybody was opposed to it. On the other hand, the government now says it has a way to hack into somebody's locked iPhone running a iOS 9.0. So it's unclear what the government will do with that information, but it's not comforting to Apple to know that the government can do that at will.
Joseph, do we know how the government can do that? Did the FBI achieve that themselves? Did they have help? Is there any idea how they got in?
The government is saying very little about this, and Apple doesn't know. There's a lot of speculation. All the government is saying is that it was somebody from outside the government that was keeping track of the events and decided to volunteer some information. We don't know. There was a military contractor, which is possible. It might be a forensics firm. It might be a security firm in some other country. It was not an element of the U.S. government, and that's about all they've said. We don't know how they did.
Sorry, Joseph. Is it plausible that Apple doesn't know? Do you believe that? Because obviously they want to be as far from this as they possibly can be. Ignorance is bliss to a certain extent for them.
There are elements in which the less Apple knows, the better. But no, I think Apple would very much like to know what this problem is, and then they'd fix it for everybody. Nobody, they want to be able to sell a secure product, and right now they can't sell a completely secure product because they know that the government can get into it. So one of the major unanswered questions here is not only how did the government get in, but what will they do with that information? They might share it with Apple after they've done what they've done, or they might give it only to other law enforcement and it'll eventually leak out. We don't know.
Joseph Mean, the Technology Projects reporter from Reuters. Thanks so much for joining us, Joseph, live from San Francisco. We've been in Pakistan already tonight. Let's return there now. The suicide bomber who stood next to children's rides and blew himself up, leaving 70 dead, 300 injured, most of whom were women and children. Some 96% of Pakistan's population of over 200 million are Muslim, but those who condone violence and extremism of this sort are just that, of course, extreme, particularly in the face of growing tolerance and pluralism across the country. Acclaimed award-winning Pakistani journalist and writer Bina Shah wrote in British newspaper The Guardian that religious extremists would never succeed in taking over the country. It's a beautiful piece of writing that's available in The Guardian. Bina Shah joins us now from Karachi. Bina, it's a pleasure to have you on the program with us. People in the area responded with love and charity. Pakistan's answer to Uber, for example, gave people rides to the hospital if they were going to donate blood. People turned up in greater numbers than were needed. All of this is good, but it's not the image the world has of Pakistan. And in simple and ignorant terms, the world sees Pakistan as a place where you're not safe being Christian, and Muslims, all Muslims, are out to get you.
Yes, I know, and it's a shame that that image is being put out. Really, what I was trying to say in my piece, which you so kindly referenced, is that we do have a problem with terrorism. We do have a problem with religious intolerance. But at the end of the day, it is our humanity as people that will be our best defense against terrorism.
It's interesting, isn't it? I don't think that New Zealanders, many of whom will not have been to Pakistan, although by golly we enjoy playing cricket against them, will understand the extent to which a city like Lahore, for example, is a profoundly pluralistic, coexisting city. Yes.
Beautiful and full of culture and full of diversity. It's celebrated in literature. It was the seat of the Mughal rule over India in the 17th century. It has much history and much to offer.
So what is the splinter group of the Taliban trying to achieve?
Basically, the main Pakistani Taliban has been weakened by a military operation that has been taking place since July 2014. And they've been driven out of their strongholds in the tribal areas, as well as their strongholds in Karachi, where I'm speaking to you from now. So what is left is these weakened little splinter groups that are operating without any kind of cohesive leadership. And they're trying to strike out at very soft targets because they can no longer get to military installations, much more secure areas. They're hitting at the weakest and the most vulnerable, which is a sign of their own weakness.
Nawaz Sharif is obviously working very hard to send out a message both internally and externally that this will not be accepted and it will be stopped. Is there widespread support for that from within Pakistan?
There's very much widespread support for the stopping of attacks like this. We do not want to wage war on our Christian communities. We do love them. They're an indelible part of our society. They have contributed very much to the advancement of Pakistan. We want to protect them. It's only that we have not been cohesively united under this kind of movement, and I think now the awareness is growing. Now we will raise our voices and we will do our best.
And now the repugnance is growing too.
say that again?
Sorry, and now the repugnance is growing too. Setting aside the Islamic extremists, there is a very real sense from the Pakistani middle class, from people who are much more westernised and less extreme, which is the majority of Pakistanis, of course, that this must stop.
The majority of Pakistanis are not westernized as such. They are socially conservative, much more so than you will find in Western society, but they do not advocate violence. They may not agree with people's religious beliefs, and that's fine. We are a society. But they do not want innocent women and innocent men being killed for any agenda, religious or otherwise.
Pina Shah joining us. We apologise for that very poor line. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. Thank you for being with us tonight. In the next half hour, the parents of 3 babies born to surrogate mothers in Mexico say they're stranded in Central America. They desperately need money to get home. This is a nightmare for them. This story, a gunman sparks panic in the US Capitol grounds, wounding a visitor in a standoff with police. It was actually a small incident, but suddenly it triggered major alarms across the UN, and former Green MP Nandor Tanchos is now an official marriage celebrant and the first Rastafari celebrant in New Zealand. He joins us later in the program. All of that and more coming up in the next 29 and a bit minutes. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The government says it has no plans to sell New Zealand Post, despite the company continuing to struggle with fewer postal deliveries. The state-owned company will cut a further 500 jobs by July to remove layers of management and help streamline its operation. New Zealand Post has cut 1,300 jobs since 2013. The Finance Minister, Bill English, told reporters the company is adjusting to becoming more of a logistics business rather than just handling letters.
They've done pretty well in the circumstances.
Do you want to own a logistics company?
Well, yes, New Zealand, that's government owned, we're going to be keeping it, so they have to find a solution.
The Finance Minister, Bill English. The Senior Cabinet Minister, Paula Bennett, says she doesn't want to see MPs and ministers made less accessible despite receiving death threats. The leaders of the Labour and Green parties say they also receive abusive messages and there's no place for that sort of abuse. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Paula Bennett says she reports threats made against her to the police about once a month and says her own children pointed out a message on social media that someone should shoot her at her next public event. She says the fact that her kids were reading that stuff was distressing. The Labour Party leader Andrew Little says while nothing justifies those sorts of threats, people are feeling the pinch more now than they have in the past. The Green Party co-leader Metiria Ture also gets abuse but doesn't think it's getting worse. She believes there's enough security already in place to keep MPs safe. From Parliament, Chris Bramwell.
The Mayor of Wairoa says it's cost the District Council thousands of dollars a week to clean up silt from its drinking water after a privately owned dam broke. Craig Little says the council will be seeking to recover its costs. Sluice gates at the Waihi Dam, owned and operated by network company Eastland Group, were only just fixed last week after being damaged before Christmas. Mr Little says the silt has affected the district's use of the water in many ways.
Someone's got to pay for what we're paying, and it's not our ratepayers, because ratepayers have not done this damage to the river. So it's as simple as that. So I guess hopefully we can do it without going to a costly court case, but let's see what happens. Just watch this space, I guess.
Wairoa Mayor Craig Little. Eastland Group says it hasn't received any substantiated claims from the council. A $2.2 billion price tag has been put on replacing water supply pipes made of asbestos cement. Water New Zealand estimates 9,000 kilometres of such pipes will need to be replaced in the next 2 to 3 decades. Its chief executive, John Campbell, says many of the pipes are nearing the end of their useful life. He says local councils will have to plan carefully to make the replacement affordable to ratepayers because other parts of the water supply network also need upgrading.
As these pipes come up for renewal, and that will depend entirely on the ground conditions in which they're in and the acidity of the water that's running through them and so on, the local councils will have to make provision in their district plans for replacing, in their work plans for replacing those pipes. So communities will be exposed to that cost over the next 2 or 3 decades, I would think.
John Fallett says cheaper options to digging them out, including relining existing pipes or leaving decommissioned pipes in the ground and putting new pipes around them. Housing New Zealand is looking to recoup $54,000 from 2 tenants who contaminated their state house with methamphetamine. The Tenancy Tribunal has ordered an Ashburton woman to pay $34,000 and a former Whangarei tenant to pay more than $17,000 in clean-up costs. Housing New Zealand has welcomed the rulings. It says the financial burden of cleaning up a house contaminated by meth should not fall on the taxpayer. The Chief Operating Officer, Paul Commons, says the agency has been focusing on identifying homes where methamphetamine has been used in the past as opposed to being manufactured. A junior doctor who gave an elderly man the wrong drug for a stroke has been found to have breached patient rights. In a decision today, the Health and Disability Commissioner says the doctor made significant errors of judgment. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The 77-year-old man arrived at a Nelson hospital in 2013 after an ischemic stroke involving the brain. The house officer, believing the correct drug wasn't available, opted instead for tenecteplase, a similar drug that is not used in New Zealand for stroke patients. She ordered double the recommended dose of this drug and administered it incorrectly in the emergency department. It should have been done in intensive care, where the correct drug, alteplase, was available anyway. The man deteriorated rapidly and died. The Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the doctor should have discussed her drug choice with a senior doctor. This is Karen Brown.
In sport, the New Zealand-born England cricketer Ben Stokes believe they might take an edge into Thursday morning's World T20 semi-final in Delhi. England have played their last 2 games at the semi-final venue and have beaten New Zealand in recent clashes. Stokes says they feel they know how to counter the Black Caps game.
That's one thing that probably we do have a slight mental advantage over them, is that we beat them in the warm-up game and then we beat them in the summer as well. It's going to be tough to sort of get out into the middle and try and perform our skills against the form team. But if we can perform anything like we have done over these last 2 games against Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, then we should do all right.
Ben Stokes. The White Ferns played their semi-final against the West Indies on Thursday night. New Zealand's world golf number 1, Lydia Ko, says continually trying to perfect her game keeps her motivated. Ko won her first LPGA title of the year at yesterday's Kia Classic in California and remains in the state for this week's first major of the year, the ANA Inspiration. Ko has won 16 professional tournaments before the age of 19, including her first major at last year's Evian Championship.
Unless I hit every single, fairway and, every single shot that's going to go to the green goes in the hole, there's going to be no perfect. So I think that's the great thing about golf is that it's challenging and there's always something you can get better at.
Lydia Ko, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the odyssey of Bob Marriott, who travelled with his wife to the plain of Jars in Laos, a mysterious landscape of megalithic ruins. We have a window on the world of refugees in Sweden. Our economist Brian Easton talks about interest rates. They've never been lower. But what does that mean? And of course, our gallery of pretty ugly photos sent in by you continues to grow on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, fine tomorrow. Auckland to Wellington, including Coromandel, Western Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, and Wairarapa, fine. Eastern Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, fine spells with isolated showers today, mainly about the ranges. Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy drizzle from evening. Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges tomorrow. Bulla and Northern Westland, a few showers clearing overnight, then fine. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain with some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. For Canterbury, mostly cloudy tomorrow with patchy morning drizzle. Otago and Southland, rain at times today with possible squally thunderstorms, scattered showers elsewhere and fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, showers overnight, otherwise mainly fine. It's almost 9 minutes past 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We are going to go to Wellington now. The Wellington City Council has announced an ambitious plan to reduce emissions in the capital city. But just how realistic is the plan? And will a local approach make any difference at all? Kate Pereira Garcia investigates.
The Wellington Mayor Celia Wade-Brown today revelling in a successful event season as she gives her State of the City speech this afternoon.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, namaste, nimen hao, and warm Pacific greetings. What a tremendous summer it's been.
The Mayor opening consultation on the Council's 2016-17 long-term plan. Among the proposals is an action plan to further reduce emissions in the capital city.
The lowest greenhouse gas emissions per capita of any city in Australasia. The highest use of public transport of any city in New Zealand. And let's give some credit to the Regional Council. The new trains have attracted a 6% increase last year. More people walk to work in Wellington than almost any other city you can name.
Despite all that, the city won't reach its goal of reducing emissions to 30% of 2001 levels by 2020. However, it says the council remains committed to cutting them by 80% by 2050. Susie Kerr, a senior fellow at the Economic and Public Policy Research Institute Motu, says the council has developed a sensible plan to reach that target.
To be fair, the City Council has a limited scope of things that they can affect. And to a certain extent, a lot of the things they're trying to influence are not entirely within their control, not even primarily within their control. So they're using some of the tools that they have in that space, but a lot of that is around sort of information and behavioural change tools, which are quite hard to make really effective.
The Climate Change Action Plan includes promoting electric vehicles and car sharing while trying to reduce private car ownership. The council is also considering what to do with sewage sludge and looking at promoting insulation and solar energy to help make the city's homes and offices more efficient. Victoria University Director of Environmental Studies Raf Chapman says Wellington is leading the way nationally in this area, but that's helped by the compact nature of the city.
Wellington is pretty good, but it's not perfect. It's up against cities like Melbourne and Sydney and Portland and San Francisco and so on. It's competing in that. I mean, we're obviously a smaller city, but it's competing in that space. You know, it's got a great lifestyle. It's an attractive city, but it needs to cut its carbon emissions quite consistently. It hasn't really been performing so far very well.
The Low Carbon Capital Plan is out for consultation along with the rest of the annual plan until late next month. For Checkpoint, Kate Pereira Garcia.
6:11. The parents of 3 babies born to 2 surrogate mothers in Mexico say they're stranded in the country and need $15,000 to return home to New Zealand. Nikki and David Beard are fathers to Lachlan, born on March 1st, and twins Kelly and Blake, born on March 5th. We wanted to speak to the couple about their predicament, but they were busy at the hospital with one of their babies. So Alex Ashton has more.
In a statement, Nikki and David Beard told us that after 4 years of searching for a surrogate in New Zealand and Australia, their only hope was to go to Central America. Despite this, gay surrogacy was banned in Mexico in January of this year, just 8 weeks before their first child, Lachlan, was born. The couple says they've been victims of a perfect storm. They've lost $150,000 through a close relative's problem gambling, and the representative from the surrogacy agency they used vanished after they paid their final invoice. One of the babies was born premature in a specialist private clinic recommended by the agency, but the parents say it was filthy and Lachlan developed a bacterial infection, which cost an extra $108,000, which they hadn't budgeted for. The couple has sold their house but are still now $288,000 in debt. They're appealing to the Minister of Immigration, Michael Woodhouse, to help with passports for the babies, and to the public through Give a Little for donations to pay for the estimated $15,000 it will cost for flights home. They told us they met all their contractual obligations and assisted both surrogate mothers with food parcels, English language classes, and funding 24-hour home care during their pregnancies. They described the surrogates as beautiful and caring women whom are now very close friends. The Ministry of Social Development says the case is typical of many international surrogacies, and it's provided all the advice it can to the couple. Its Director International Casework, Paula Ratrill, says the children are Mexican citizens, so need Mexican passports to travel. They also need exit visas to leave Mexico, and these things can take some time to work through. She says it's a difficult situation for the couple. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
A junior doctor who gave the wrong drug and the wrong dosage to an elderly stroke patient who later died has escaped punishment. A 77-year-old man arrived at a Nelson hospital in late 2013 after suffering ischemic stroke involving the brain. The junior doctors decided, after consultation with the senior doctor on call, to give him a clot busting treatment, thrombolysis, but believing the correct drug for the treatment was unavailable, she opted for a similar drug that is not approved in New Zealand for stroke patients. The junior doctor also mistakenly ordered double the recommended dose of the drug and administered the treatment in the emergency department rather than in the intensive care unit, which is normal practice. The man's condition deteriorated after the treatment and he died from a brain hemorrhage a few days later. A report by the Health and Disability Commissioner released today found the doctor breached patient rights. I asked the Chief Medical Officer for Nelson Marlborough, Nick Baker, what he made of the report's findings.
I think those are fair comments for what happened. I mean, we're obviously very sorry for the family that this has been awful for the family, what's happened, and as an organisation we've learnt. OK, you've learnt what? We've learnt that the management of stroke's a very dangerous condition, is quite complicated. And when this happened, we were introducing a fairly new procedure to our organisation, which only needs to be done to a small proportion of people who are suffering a stroke. And in doing that, we got it wrong. OK. Who got it wrong? Was it the junior doctor or the senior doctor or both? I think it's really the team, so that this was a number of doctors involved and those that created the environment for the care. So our policies and protocols and our systems, things like orientation and preparation. So as an organisation, we have to look to our systems knowing that people will always get things wrong sometimes.
Did those systems lead to a junior doctor being overworked, overstressed and a little bit out of her depth in this circumstance?
I think we had a junior doctor who could have been better orientated to the role she was filling, could have been better supported by senior staff on site, and could have had better systems in place to make doing the right thing much easier. And one major change we've brought about since this case is we now have medical registrars in the hospital, so we are not in that position any longer with a more junior doctor really having to cope with a high workload.
OK, of course this is no good whatsoever to the man who was dead and whose death appears to have been thoroughly preventable.
Well, strokes are highly dangerous conditions. Only a small proportion of them will benefit from the treatment that was offered. That really there's two sort of main ways of having a stroke. Either a blood vessel is blocked or bleeding into the brain. And in this case, it certainly looked like it was a blocked blood vessel, so could have benefited from thrombolysis, a treatment to dissolve clots. But yes, the treatment that was given was at a dose that could well have increased the chances of bleeding. OK. In which case we have a death. To what extent do you believe this death could have been avoided? I don't know what the outcome would have been if everything had gone absolutely perfectly. Sadly, strokes are highly dangerous. A lot of people who survive strokes are left with severe permanent disability. So I don't know what the outcome would have been. OK, the Commissioner found the doctor failed to provide care to the patient with reasonable care and skill. The senior doctor who was supposed to be overseeing the work of the house officer didn't properly disclose the risks. The DHB's processes to treat stroke victims were inadequate. You know, this is pretty damning stuff. Yes, I think we've learned from that. As I say, we've increased the senior staffing that's available, and maybe one of the most exciting initiatives that we're just about to undertake is a pilot of a tele-stroke service, recognising the challenges of getting timely care. You can only do this sort of treatment if you get there within a few hours of the initial event, and reliable care, that there'll be a telephone a stroke expert available on the end of the telephone to support people in our district health board, as in others, so that we can try and get a more reliable, consistent approach to the management of stroke, recognising how difficult it is. OK. Have either the junior doctor or the senior doctor involved in this case been disciplined in any way? No, we've looked to the systems, and we recognise that neither of these people set about to cause the problem, but the environment and systems that were in place at the time meant that it could happen. And I think we can make that much less likely. But unfortunately, people will get things wrong from time to time.
Nick Baker, the Chief Medical Officer for Nelson Marlborough. 19 minutes past 6. Coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30 with Rowan Quinn, the FBI cracks the iPhone. We talked about this a bit briefly before, but Rowan's going to look at what this means for users. Many people listening, I suspect. And the marathon takes off in India. All of that and more coming up at 6:30. A gunman has sparked panic at the heart of the US Capitol grounds, wounding a visitor in a standoff with police before being shot himself. The report of gunfire in a city on heightened alert because of terrorist attacks in Europe and Pakistan sent dozens of emergency vehicles to the Capitol building and forced staff and visitors into lockdown. There was a very big reaction to this. More on that in a moment. But first, Linda So from Reuters explains how the incident unfolded.
The U.S. Capitol placed on temporary lockdown after police say a man drew a weapon and pointed it at officers in the screening area of the Capitol Visitor Center.
An officer fired and struck the suspect, who was subsequently treated by medical personnel. The suspect was taken into custody and transported to the hospital for treatment.
Police believe the incident was an act of a single person who was known to authorities through previous contact. They say he had frequented the Capitol grounds before. Authorities say a female bystander suffered minor injuries and was taken to the hospital. No officers were hurt. Both the House and Senate are in recess this week, but the incident led to some tense moments for tourists.
I'm a teacher. We go through lockdown drills, and they're always drills, but this was the real thing.
It was very, very scary. It's not something that I'm used to. I know no one's used to that kind of thing, but obviously you feel the fear, kind of viscerally.
Authorities say the Capitol Visitor Center will open on Tuesday for regular business.
You would have heard that man say, you feel the fear. Well, it appears way beyond the Capitol, they felt it. The incident appears to have been a one-off criminal act, yes, but our New York correspondent, Mimi Chamin, told us it was initially treated as something much, much worse than that.
Certainly so. It was clear even in New York City that there were questions on everyone's mind. Is this a terrorist act? We have had several terrorist acts in recent past across the world, from Brussels to most recently Lahore in Pakistan. And this is Washington, D.C. It's the seat of government. We're going through a contentious election campaign period. We've got a lot of internal strife between, conservatives and Democrats. And so absolutely, we saw even in New York City, security beefed up. You could hear the sirens going down on Times Square. There was even a suspicious package at the Marriott Marquis Hotel that caused a lockdown of Times Square, right overlapping with that shooting on Capitol Hill. So absolutely, it speaks to a bigger, renewed fears for terrorism here.
Wow, so this was a one-off incident on Capitol Hill, and the reaction was immediate in places like New York as well.
Yes, exactly. I think that there is a very clear indication that as a community, as a global community, we're incredibly connected when it comes to acts of terrorism. There's lots of fear about the fact that we're no longer dealing with sort of large groups that operate far away from our safe borders, or our supposedly safe borders. There's an awareness now that lone wolf acts are increasing and that this is the climate for them. So certainly it seems as though when one thing happens, we've seen a chain reaction. We saw Abdulsalam arrested, and then just a few days later, those attacks happened in Brussels. So I think it is quite clear that as a global community, there is a sense that for every action, there is a reaction. And that was very clear today in the U.S.
So, Mimi, given this was an isolated incident, what do police there know about the perpetrator?
Well, the police are declining to identify him, although several media sources have reported, ABC News, NBC News have reported the name of the suspect, supposedly someone who disrupted a meeting at the House of Representatives back in October of 2015 and was arrested for that act. Now, a journalist did ask Capitol Capitol Hill police chief whether it was the same perpetrator, and he declined to comment on that. All they would say is that this was a lone person acting alone, and he has no known links to terrorism himself, and he is in police custody in hospital as he did sustain wounds from being shot at by an officer.
It's 24 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. Former Green MP Nandor Tanchos is now an official marriage celebrant and the first Rastafari celebrant in New Zealand. He's been asked to do the ceremony by a number of different people in the past, mostly but not exclusively Rastafari. He says he only applied because he'd been getting requests from people. I asked him what the difference is between a Rastafari marriage ceremony and, well, other kinds.
I suppose there's two things about it. One is that people within the Rastafari community who want to get married want to have the celebrant or the person officiating to be someone from the community, who understands their philosophy, their way of life, and can bring a kind of a Rastafari vibration to the thing. In practical terms, I suppose that there would be readings that I would do that other practitioners might not.
Give me an example, Nandor.
Or, for example, I might read some of words from His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie, which most other people wouldn't do.
And did His Majesty have views on marriage? Is there some good advice there, some stuff to be working with?
There's a couple of things. One is that particularly when Empress Menen died, he said some very moving things about her example and her role as his companion through life. So there's some wonderful things from there.
Yeah.
The other thing is that his living example. So when His Majesty was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia in 1930, he broke tradition, and he had him and Empress Menen were crowned at the same time, side by side. Previously, the Empress would have been crowned a few days later, and so the message and example really is that men and women walk through life side by side in marriage rather than one in front and one behind.
Nandor, I feel like getting married, although I am married. So in fact, it's the same good stuff, isn't it, about mutual respect and equality and those good things?
Yeah, and I think if you look at all different faiths, religions, ethical philosophies, it is pretty much the same good stuff. And that's the beautiful thing. That's the thing that can unite us all. But I think also the way we express them in cultural terms is different for different people. And so, it's important for the Rastafari people to have a celebrant that recognises that and is able to express our own Rastafari culture.
What about non-Rastafari people? Will you, as a celebrant, marry any of those people?
Oh, absolutely. Look, for me, my primary focus has been to make sure that the Rastafari community is served, but I've had requests from a whole lot of people who are not Rastafari but feel the Rastafari vibration, or they kind of identify with the culture in some way, even though they wouldn't describe themselves as Rasta. So anyone who wants the kind of ceremony that I'll bring, of course, I'm absolutely happy to participate. And to me, being part of something that joins two people who love each other together in a kind of public declaration of love, it's such a beautiful thing. I'm very happy to be here.
I couldn't agree more. Isn't it funny? How old are you, Nandor?
50.
Yeah, I'm 52, so we're the same age. And, there was a period 20 or 30 years ago when marriage was becoming super square and no one wanted to do it anymore. Now, whatever kind of marriage you want, you can have, and people are embracing it all over again, which is lovely, isn't it?
It is beautiful, and I'm the same. For a long time, I never saw myself getting married, but my wife and I were married a few years ago. And I suppose the thing is that people are recreating these ceremonies for ourselves. Ceremony is important in life. It marks the passages of life and major events in life. And I think people kind of rejected a way of doing it that didn't sit with their own way of thinking. But now, as you say, we can do these things in our own ways. We can remake them. And so then it's about making it relevant again for people's lives.
Nandor Tanchos, who's becoming the country's first Rastafari marriage celebrant. I imagine there'll be glorious occasions, as weddings are. Great music, of course, too. The music I listen to is mostly about unrequited love, miserable songs about people not loving you back. I can't imagine too many indie folk or shoegaze marriage celebrants. Oh, this girl won't take your hand. She probably won't even like you. No future in that. Anyway, lots of feedback on Bunnings. Re the removal of defibrillators by Bunnings stores. I'm guessing it's because of the new workplace safety law coming in next week. Their lawyers will be distancing them at all possibility from more liability. Gosh, that's a good point. Chris will make an inquiry about that. Sorry, I read it very badly, but it's a very good point. Simple, Bunnings are arrogant Aussies. As a property investor, I spend about 4 to 5K plus per year at Mitre 10. And Mitre 10 are further away. I passed Bunnings on the way. We've been getting a bit of feedback along those lines over the past few weeks. Too bad if a Bunnings executive has a heart attack on the premises, no defibrillator to save their lives. They should donate it to Mitre 10, says Gillian. Seems to be a scary company, says Martin, that defib thing, and their attitude to staff on other matters seems to have no place here. Maybe they could hopefully pull out of the country and let a New Zealand chain get a chance to get a foot in. Would be good. I quite like their stores, but on my visits have detected staff discontent. Maybe that's the Australian way. Keep them under the thumb. Makes me want to pick it in their car park. I mentioned the defib thing to a friend in Sydney, and he replied they have one at his work at a Sydney council. That from Martin. Bunnings are welcome to appear on our program. We're delighted to have them. That ends Checkpoint for tonight.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government says it's not planning to sell New Zealand Post. Cabinet Minister Paula Bennett says she doesn't want MPs becoming less accessible despite receiving death threats. The Mayor of Wairoa says the District Council will be seeking to recover money it's needed to spend cleaning up silt from a privately owned dam. And Water New Zealand estimates it will cost $2.2 billion to replace asbestos cement pipes. Our next news and weather at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm Rowan Quinn. Today, the FBI hacks the iPhone, Trump and Cruz keep getting personal, and the marathon takes off in India. These stories and more in World Watch PM.